Welcome to today's Corporate Venturing Insider series. Today I'm excited to have Conrad with us. It's going to be a very interesting discussions because you're mixing Irish with French. Conrad, welcome.
Nicolas, good to see you again. It's great to have to be with you on this interview. I'm looking forward to it.
I'm looking forward to it. So you have a entrepreneurship background and venture capital background, but let's start. What was your journey into venture capital?
Well, it's a long path. I won't say it's an overnight thing getting to be in venture capital. By way of introduction, we're a first-time early-stage deep tech fund, co-located in myself here in the Bay Area, and my partner Chris Allegro in Seattle. However, having said that, my career has been almost entirely in deep tech, starting out in research engineering through classic large major international corporations, AT&T, NEC, I could name two, for example, but also worked in some startups too. But I've crisscrossed a number of technologies from semiconductors, optics, biotech, lived internationally, much like you have, in Japan, in Germany, the United Kingdom, grew up in Ireland, and now very firmly living here in the United States. But the path to becoming a VC is more recent, and I was more recently a founder and CEO of an early stage startup company, which we took from seed through Series D and had a successful exit to a major multinational corporation, DuPont. So I want to say that sort of gives you some of the experiences and maybe tools, if you will, to convince investors to give you money to invest in startup companies and entrepreneurs. So I think it's not so more complicated than that.
So I think I'm going to use these interviews for you to be the voice of the entrepreneurs. But before that, did you have a technical background? Was it your educational background?
Yes, for sure. I have. You may hear me referring to myself as an engineer along the way, but that's actually not totally correct. I'm actually a physics major. I've got a bachelor's and master's in applied physics from Trinity College in Dublin in Ireland, and also at University College Dublin in Ireland. So I have strong, I think, classical science background, which allows me, I think, to pawn myself off as an engineer of sorts. But it's always been technology from the get-go.
Now, you started working in Japan with NEC, then AT&T. I mean, you're talking about very big companies. You were in Japan. Tell us about this experience and how it shaped you to then start your own company.
Yeah, well, there's a lot that has happened in between those two statements. But perhaps for brevity, I left Ireland in the late 80s to go to Japan. And for those who are of my age, you wouldn't be included in that, Nicolas. 1980s, Japan was number one economy in the world.
Yep.
It was the place to be. It was the language to learn. It was the place to set your career up for success, much like we might have said about China for the last couple of years, or India perhaps today,
yep,
or Silicon Valley. So anyway, long story short, I did go to Japan. I worked in optoelectronics research. I worked on TPC5, which is Trans-Pacific Cable. It's the very first all optically amplified fiber optic cable that was linked between Japan and the United States. It was a multi-billion-dollar project by KDD and by AT&T. So I was involved in the component side of that world, if you will. So published a lot of papers, did a lot of engineering. I was a research engineer by title, and later joined AT&T and moved to the United States, and in their microelectronics group. When at that time AT&T was, for want of a better word, a monopoly. It was the de facto telephone company of the United States, certainly for long distance and international. I make a joke with younger people that I mentor in terms of choosing between taking a career and what might be a factor for you deciding on taking something at A or B, or whether it's Apple or Google or whatever.
Yep.
And I openly said that I took a job career with AT&T because at that time it was $7 a minute to call my mother back in Ireland. So as an employee, you get free phone calls. So that to me sounded like a pretty darn good perk and a good reason to join AT&T. Nowadays, people would find that kind of humorous because making a phone call is pretty much free.
It is, yeah. Actually, I used to work in British Telecom where I could use mobile phone calling free everywhere.
Yeah, it was a major perk. It's like free food, right?
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. So, but to continue that, I did go to AT&T, which then subsequently spun out as a company called Lucent Technologies, another name perhaps recognizable to some of your audience listeners. And I went to Europe to run marketing across Europe, based in Munich for a number of years, and in the UK. And that was, designing in and selling and marketing optical components, lasers, transceivers, and so forth into the major telecom equipment manufacturers. And that would have been the precursor to the telecom bubble that we know. I subsequently moved back to the United States again with Lucent, or its predecessor parent AT&T. I left soon after to join a startup in California. It wasn't successful. It was in the MEMS optical switching space. It was a classic, raised a lot of money. We had filed to go public. And the telecom bubble, crashed all around us, and didn't end up as a success story, but great learnings for myself. And I think that became, quite frankly, the basis for my second attempt at a startup where.
So before we move to the second attempt, can you double click on the learnings from that crash?
Yeah. So the learnings from that crash were, it was a period of exuberance. You may have heard that term during the telecom period, where there was a lot of capital sloshing around. It was classic .com telecom, the internet doubling every 3 months, which was later proven to be incorrect, but massive capacity overbills. It's, you could compare it with daffodils from the Netherlands, or railroads being built in the United States at the turn of the century. Build the railroads to places where there is nobody living, but they will come, but they never came. Yep. So as a result, I think what I learned was, one thing I learned was, I think an important, one of many things was, and it's pertinent to venture capital, to us, and also to the people we fund and entrepreneurs in general, but raising capital is not a measure of success, actually. Particularly in times like that, because raising money during those periods was actually relatively easy. I have to say, looking back on it, it's how you deploy that capital, how you grow into your valuation, how you keep your eye on an exit that's, reflects what's reality. And because in the end of the day, that's what venture capital is. You're taking money, you're taking your own equity as an entrepreneur, and the whole point is to make a successful return for all the stakeholders, including yourself and your investors and everybody included, and your employees. So I think that was probably one of many key learnings for me, and among many. I mean, we could talk about this in quite a lot of detail.
Yeah. So then moving on to the next startup.
Yeah, and that was a nanomaterials company in close by here in Sunnyvale in Santa Clara County in Silicon Valley. And that was an early stage materials company, which we built a material to make solar panels more efficient. And you may recall solar went through its own bubble, if you will. And I think, to sort of connect to the question that you posed a moment ago, Nicolas, the learnings from the first time around was, you use capital wisely, take capital wisely, manage your spend wisely, hire wisely. We were rather conservative in our approach compared to a lot of our peers around who are building enormous factories and capacity. I pivoted the company fairly early in its development away from capital intensive product development to licensing and material to those that do make solar cells, which turns out we're all in China at the time.
Yeah.
And I do remember going to China on one business trip, one of my earliest ones, where I came back in almost disbelief at the sheer scale of capacity being built in China, almost being ignored, frankly, if I may say, by a lot of my peers in the solar startup space. So I made a decision to reposition the company, not to do that, because we're not going to win there, but actually to go and be nimble and sell the material to these customers to make their products better. And that turned out to be the winning formula, actually.
Yeah.
So a little bit of luck, a little bit of insight, and a little bit of guts, I have to say, by me and my management team, because we had to present a very different plan to our investors and our board. They didn't necessarily love the idea at all, and it was one of those board meetings where it could have gone very badly for all of us. But thankfully, we prevailed. The investors agreed with this shift in strategy, and the company went on to be a very big success.
I think here you mentioned something about ignoring, but I feel like it was more blind spots from the other companies, not even realizing how China was scaling and ramping up fast. You now, as a VC, when you look at entrepreneurs, how do you assess whether they are ignoring signals or they actually have blind spots?
Well, apart from the obvious, where when you pose a question, they ignore the question. But I don't usually give up and I push on those issues with the CEOs and the founders. I do, instead of imposing my will or imposing my views or imposing my old-fashioned ideas, maybe I just encourage them to, sort of ignore what perhaps you're reading geopolitically, get on an airplane. Let's use the example of China, fly to Shenzhen, go visit some companies and just see for yourself and make a determination for yourself what you think is going on, because not everything is reported in the news. And it behooves you to know what's going on. And I don't mean to pick on China in particular. India could be the same thing, or Europe.
Go from first principles, what you observe.
Go see, go talk, go ask questions. And I'm always surprised, and maybe you're not, you believe the same way, but I'm always pleasantly surprised that customers are, I think, universally very open and very honest, and whether it's in Germany or in Japan or in China, they will share with you to a degree what their problem or pain points are. So ask the questions. As clumsy as they may sound, and as a startup, it can be difficult because you're smaller and you're trying to act bigger than you actually are. But there's no other way to find out. You're not going to find it out on Google, and you're not going to find it out buying a $20,000 report online. You have to go there and find out. And you may not like the answer, but you should adapt from that information and reassess if necessary. And because things are not static. Your business plan that you created and you got your seed funding from 6 months or 1 year ago is probably already out of date.
Yeah. And you do invest in early stage. So I think this business development discipline, going and talk to customer, asking open questions, try to understand the market, that must come across a lot of times when you meet these entrepreneurs, especially early, who have maybe a view of the market, but they haven't actually validated it. Yeah. How do you go about assessing that, again, how they have looked at the market?
Yeah, and in a lot of instances, to that question, the founding entrepreneur may have never actually had a job before, came straight out of his postdoctoral or her postdoctoral degree at Stanford and started this company. So there is no experience at all. There's no lack of enthusiasm to learn. There's no lack of entrepreneurship to learn. But I do, all we can do is encourage, mentor, share whatever we learn, invite them to events that they may pick up things, encourage them to go to this event. It's going to cost you $2,000 on an airplane ticket, but I think you should go. It's worth your while. Just be conscious of what's going on around you. And we also send up flares that, hey, I think you also, in your position, you get to see a lot of similar companies, you could say competitive to things you've invested in. you have a responsibility to manage your reputation and manage that information carefully. But you do send signals like, that you're not the only one. There are a lot of people trying to catch up with you. And, don't think you're the only kid in town. That's never the case.
Never
the case. And there are ones out there you never even heard of before, nor we have heard before. So,
yeah.
But it's paranoia. I think paranoia is a good thing. And I think hubris is what will kill you.
Well, Andy Grove is famous for saying the paranoids are the ones that survives.
That's absolutely right. But I, from the point of view of what we, without getting off the topic too much, but what we like to invest in is we call it the jockey, the person who's going to ride this horse. It's all about the entrepreneur and the founder. They can be the most brilliant mind. They can have countless papers they've written on. They can maybe quite famous and well respected and versed in their subject matter expertise. But can you back this person to run this thing? Maybe you can for a short period of time, but be upfront that you may not be the CEO long term. But if you cannot sell your vision, you cannot you cannot hire people, you cannot cajole people to come join your gang and quit their jobs to join this effort. We wouldn't be interested in it. There's a certain characteristics we're looking for in a founder, which I'm sure are not too different from what you perhaps look at too.
No, I think it's quite similar, but I want to double click on that. And actually, I should mention that my professor who inspired me to start TDK Ventures is Ilya Strebulov, and he's just launching his new book, The Venture Mindset. So I highly recommend it. But on top of that, one of the 9 rules that he mentioned about the venture mindset is bet on the jockey. So I want to double click on what you just said, because you actually use the same term. What are these characteristics you're looking for the jockeys, these entrepreneurs that comes to your office as an idea, but still very early stage? He hasn't proven herself or himself.
Yeah. Well, I think first impressions are important for me. I admit. I think conviction. They have to have conviction and passion. I know that there's simple words to say, but you can't fake passion and you cannot fake conviction. Or if you can't pick them up, you can't be in the VC business if you can't pick up those signals right away. But I think that's a given. That's a mandatory. But there's an element of likability because you have to hire people, you have to convince people, and then you have to convince customers and people to try out your prototype at some point down the road too. Not to mention you got to raise money. So there's a lot of those soft skills that I look for. I put those very high up. Not where they're the most important thing, but they're very, very important. The ability to connect. Because I do firmly believe that commerce is an emotional thing. If you strip away all the technology, it's an emotional. When you're developing a product, no matter what it is, there's somebody at the other end of the line that's going to buy this thing or widget or product. And I'm not talking necessarily about consumer products, but something that goes into a turbine at Siemens, for example. There's somebody at the end of the line that's going to have to be convinced to buy this. So you have to have those soft skills. Those soft skills that are internationally portable. I don't mean you need to speak foreign languages. That would be helpful. But you need to be able to understand and read the situation. What is the pain point? And that's where the opportunity is, because at the end of the day, my simplistic view of startups and the advantages that a startup truly have is speed. Money is fungible. If you pour enough money and time and people at an engineering problem, state the problem, I think you can solve it. The question is, you got to go as fast as you can. You got to go faster than the incumbents. You got to pivot and change and maneuver your way through that. But speed is a true advantage. It is maybe one of the most important advantages that a startup has.
No, I really like it. I think it's speed, and the soft skills you mentioned, and even earlier you mentioned about your ability to sell your vision, which you need for raising money, for getting customers, for hiring the right people who can then hire the right people. So yeah, I think that combination for early stage is critical, and that's why the betting on the jockey is a very good analogy versus a horse.
Yeah, and it's not for everybody. It's a particular skill set. It's just how we are genetically made up, and life experiences that we may have had through our lives, and we may develop them later in life than in early in life. But there are kids that can come out of college and they have it right away, but they're a small pool, and there are those that develop it mid-career and they're amazing at it, and there are those who develop it later in career. So, but it's a vital element. People have got to like you, got to believe in you. Honestly, I see so many presentations, much like you do. You probably see way more than me, given the scale of your operation. I see so many presentations, and we don't believe half of the revenue numbers. We don't believe any of the timelines. We don't even believe what they say they're going to need in terms of entire capital to get this company to break even. But that's okay. That's okay, because we believe in this person, and this business plan is out of date anyway by the time this meeting is over. But we believe in you. We think you're going to figure out. You're going to put your mind and your heart and your soul, and you can sell this vision. I think that's what we will back.
So let me ask you a tough question. If you had Conrad at the time starting the startup and you were the VC, how would you have assessed yourself, the younger Conrad? And how would you have maybe advised him on doing something different at the beginning of the startup journey?
Yeah, well, I mean, I did it a little bit later in my career. So I want to say in my late, my early 30s. So
Yep.
that could be conceived as old in some quarters. But I think I think maybe controlling some of my energy and focusing it in certain other areas than trying to do everything would be one area. But I was always a fairly high energy person, so I could keep going at things very hard in parallel, and wasn't afraid to burn two ends of the candle, as they say. But I think if I can answer it a different way, if I look at myself today, if I tried, I'd certainly would be more efficient. But why is that? Probably because I have more wisdom, perhaps, more experience.
I think it would be more efficient and effective, right?
Yeah, I think that's probably it. And I think maybe to sort of finish off that question, if I think I can, I think in the success story of my startup in Ovalite, which we sold to DuPont, I think one important, one of many, but one that sticks out that's maybe pertinent to mention here. I hired towards the end of the cycle of the company, before we went to our last financing, and then we ultimately got an exit. I brought in a chief financial officer, which we didn't have it up until that point. We had a head of finance, but I brought in, after interviewing very many people, but I brought in a very experienced, if I may say, older, wiser person in years and experience than me as a CEO. And I think he played an instrumental part in the final stage of the company to success, because of the things I just mentioned. Just a lot of experience, a lot of wisdom, a lot of efficiency, a lot of pattern recognition, which I had too, but he would have had certainly a lot more, and certainly a lot more in terms of just a pure CFO role. So I think that was also a recognition of bringing in somebody who was really, really experienced, way beyond my skill set, in an area where we needed help, and it ultimately, I think, played an important part in the company's success.
That's a very hard change to make. And for most entrepreneurs who start their own startups, that's a very tough one to maybe consider or to execute. And sometimes that transition doesn't happen well. So do you have any advice for the entrepreneurs listening in on how to think about it, and if you do want to go that way, to make it work better?
Yeah, I think the best, for me, one of the best acid tests is to go to very crude capitalistic terms. So you put you put the technology aside for a moment, you put the product, all the hoopla and excitement and the milestones and the successes of the company to date, you distill it down to one single sort of statement that, at the end of the day, the only reason we're doing all of this experiment as a collective team of people, and this is very, very clear in Silicon Valley, is that we all want to make some money for ourselves, for our families, for our livelihoods, for our shareholders, and of course, we also want the success and bragging rights of having sold a successful product to big customers and had an exit of some IPO would be great. But, think if you can accomplish that. So I think getting that conversation down to why are we doing this, and because it's often lost with founders that this is all about, building a great product. Yeah, we get that part. I got that from the beginning when I first met you. But I want to remind, why are we doing this again? That you took venture capital money, you took people's money. The goal is to make a successful return on this investment for everybody, including all the people you cajole to come and join you on your gang. So I think that's a good way to sort of force are you going to be able to take this now to the next very more difficult tasks ahead? Because it gets harder. The requirements, the skill set, the board expectations, the shareholders' expectations get much higher, more difficult, more stressful, if I may say. And that can sometimes force, you know what, maybe we do need some help. I need some help. Maybe, if we want that result. And I just remembered I do want that outcome. Yeah, let's get some help. I don't mind. Let's get somebody who's been around this track a few times already before successfully. And I think that helps. Now, there could be situations where over my dead body, that's not going to happen. But, I haven't seen that personally myself, because I think it gets back to the jockey you hired and you've worked with and been alongside, and you've been out to dinner, you've met their wives, their kids, everything about them, you help them hire. So it's not a difficult conversation to have. It can be, I think it's something you get to know some of these people more than you spend more time with them than your spouse or your children. So.
And also, I think because you mentioned about the soft skills, I think part of that is EQ, openness, coachability that would come across in your filtering process.
That's right. And it's like the classic, what's the annual appraisal review in major corporations, which no one likes. I never like them. I don't think anybody likes the employees don't like. So it's like you just give continuous feedback. You don't wait for board meetings. You have regular contact. Right here, how's it going? You got to mentor. You got to encourage, but you got to coach. You got to complain sometimes. But just you got to do all of the above. But fortunately, with entrepreneurs, you don't have to complain. They're motivated enough to move the engine forward themselves. Yeah. But I think I think it's important to be a good board member, a good mentor, be involved. Don't be hands off. Don't just show up to a board meeting just to hear 20 slides of PDF. Be involved. The board meeting should be more a checkbox more than anything. The board meeting's happening every day of the week. So
I'll ask more questions about board member, but I want to talk about, you have an international background. You went to Japan, Europe. I saw you went to the London Business School, and then the US. And how would you characterize, especially in terms of venture capital, but also entrepreneurship, the Bay Area? What's so special about the Bay Area?
Well, I mean, just the obvious, just the diversity of the people, the percentile of graduate degrees, and just smart people walking around from all parts of the world. Pick a country at your liking from A to Z right now, and chances are the top 1%, there's a handful of them here in the Bay Area somewhere, doing something remarkable. But I think to your point about your question about international, I think that helps. I know it helps me, and I think it helps the entrepreneurs. It helps the communications. It helps the relationships. It helps break down any barriers or walls, because there's a fluidity in terms of I haven't worked in every country in the world, but I've been to 80 countries around the world. I've lived and worked in many of them, in many countries, and I think having an appreciation and empathy and understanding and interest in other cultures and diversities and peoples and schools. It makes things just move quicker, easier. There's less inertia, and you just get on with the mission. So I think it's a very unique place on earth where you've got this melting pot of brilliance and diversity that can come together and join and do some amazing things. We had at Innovolite, my last startup, we had, if I recall, 25 different nationalities in the company, which is really amazing. Of a company of 80 people, by the way, at its peak, that is quite something, and it makes the job more fun for everybody. The best ideas come out, the most unorthodox ideas, and some of those most unorthodox and crazy ideas are what gives you the breakthrough that you need to be special as a company.
So I think you're selling it for entrepreneurs and startups why they would succeed, which I guess is a magnet for VCs to be around. So tell us a little bit about MetaVC. How do you think about Bay Area versus investing outside? And
yeah, well, I mean, obviously, given the nature of where we're located, there's an obvious epicenter of activity and investment around the Bay Area. But we have investments in Austin, Texas. We've got investments up in Washington State. I'm looking at a deal in New York right now. It'll spin out of Princeton University, but by and large, it probably will be in New York. But given the size of our team and our location, we don't have the resources to go invest in a startup in Israel or in Paris or whatever. Not yet. Not that we don't look at them. I think the deal flow is very good. You see a lot of things. We tend to gravitate to early stage stuff. So I personally spent a lot of time at Stanford University, at UC Berkeley, but I've also just come back from the East Coast. I was at Princeton, Columbia. I do, get to look at other early stage things there too. So we do. I think being in the Bay Area, you can get in your car and you can go meet pretty much anybody you want to go meet pretty easily. Now, having said that, the Bay Area is very competitive, even in the venture capital community. I think you probably recognize too. So while we see a lot of deals, there's a lot of other VCs, and everybody's competing for the best deals. So you have to go up against that. There are bigger and better forces than you in the Bay Area that entrepreneurs would love to have investment dollars from too. So, but we do get out there. We're very networked, very high touch. I like to call ourselves a high touch group. We're always out there socializing, meeting, investing our time. And it's enjoyable just to meet with entrepreneurs and spend time. Because that's where the serendipity of meeting people, that's sometimes where the best ideas and the best referrals come from. It's not going to come in an email. It does sometimes, but that's not always how the best stuff comes.
So I think when we think about early stage, you mentioned the value of being close to universities. I think that's true for corporate VCs and VCs. Can you share maybe some of the best practices of how to engage with universities, getting close to their students who may start the next big thing?
Yeah, it's not for us anyway. I don't view it as that complicated. You think of the gigantic scale of the campus of Stanford University or UC Berkeley. So we don't engage with the gigantic stature of Stanford University and the gigantic stature of UC Berkeley. We engage with a handful of individuals in this huge metropolis of these universities who tend to be, I would like to think, connected to the things we're most interested in.
Yeah.
And we've developed relationships whereby they view us as an important resource. So it's a symbiotic situation where, they'll give us an early look. We get to know really what's going on before it's ready. So that precludes me from looking at the pharmaceutical department down at Stanford because I don't know anything about that sector, nor have we any interest. So we tend to pick our areas, pick the few professors. So in a pool of 10 professors, there's probably one or two that really have that sort of spin out a company sort of genetics that they just want to build businesses, and they've got a track record, or they want to build a track record of doing that. So we sort of gravitate to those. So it's you molding your way in. It's all about the relationships, and you build from that. And we've been building on that, not over the course of the 2 years we've been now as a VC, but throughout our career. So we, it's not like we've just turned the switch on and started to develop relationships. We've had a lot of this relationship building for years in the making. So,
Yep. No, that makes sense. And I think it's really about which labs or which professor resonate with your investment thesis, your investment scope.
right. That's right. And in the case of MetaMaterials, our name is MetaVC Partners. So contrary to what people might believe where the word came from, it's actually to do with meta materials. And we, if you look around the world or in the United States for sort of the real gems of metamaterials, disruptive technologies, they come from places like Duke University, where we've had a lot of good experiences with, from Columbia, from Stanford University. We've seen things out of University of Toronto. And then if you go across the waters, Imperial College in London and places like that, you just start to MIT and Harvard, of course, particularly Harvard when it comes to optics. We see, and we know all the key figureheads there and the students and the things that are sort of going on, and we keep a close pulse on that. But I also want to underline, we're not only looking at university spinners. We have a lot of deal flow coming our way from things we just don't see on a normal day basis. But people have sort of associated with us now, thankfully, with being the metamaterials guys. So we get stuff being referred to us or directly to us that perhaps are too small for big VCs. So we've got a very healthy pipeline. And so pipeline is not an issue for us. It's more an issue finding back to the beginning of our conversation today, finding the right jockey to run these. We can find great technologies at many universities, but if there's no jockey within 30 miles to run this thing, it ain't going anywhere.
Yeah, talking of metamaterials, like Professor Capaccio in Harvard, and
That's
started
right.
Metalens, and now
That's right.
we have an amazing Rob Devlin, the CEO, is a
Yes, we
perfect
know Rob.
jockey for the company.
Yes. No, Federico Capasso, David Smith at Duke, Mark Brungersman at Stanford. I could go on and on. There's just a lot of great pioneers, I think is the best way to describe them. I mean,
Yep.
You asked me earlier about my educational background. I studied physics. There was no study of metamaterials. I frankly never heard of the term before. So it's a really pioneering area of enormous disruption in computing, in sensors, in medical devices, in communications. It's in space. It's a remarkably disruptive area, which we're finding to be just a hotbed of activity.
Actually, I think this is where you have chosen such a good topic to start a VC, because if you think about venture capital investments, you need to be early, not too early, but early enough to see something very disruptive before it becomes obvious to everyone.
Yes. And thankfully, there were some even earlier stage companies than what we're working on now. It's pretty in RF, in antennas and communications. And I go back to Duke University as sort of been a key epicenter for some of those early developments and early funded companies like Echodyne and Pivotal Comware and Chimeta and things like that. But now we're seeing a whole exciting area in optical metamaterials. You mentioned one investment you've also made, which is going to disrupt all sorts of new things. And I think it's the right time for computing, for sensors, for biomedical devices. It's not too early where there's just really enormous risk. There's risk. There's always risk with early stage, but we're in the stage of our careers, both my partner and I, Chris and myself, in terms of not being enamored or overly excited about science for the sake of science. Don't be mistaken. Behind this thick skin here, we are in the business of making money for our investors, and we want our entrepreneurs to make a lot of money and their teams to make a lot of money. That's the whole point of this. We're less interested in writing research papers and getting our names in the papers. We want to build successful businesses with great products that are worth a lot of money.
Yeah. No, I think, I mean, I learned about metamaterials when we looked into MetaLens, and to be able to invest in a technology that will disrupt the way optics have been done for 600 years is
Yeah,
pretty amazing.
it really is. And I can disclose this because it's public information, but of this, one of the 6 investors in our fund is Corning. And Corning is synonymous with optics. I mean, it is the ground zero of optical in the world, if not in the United States. I don't want to get this number wrong, but it's at least a 150-year-old company, which is synonymous with Gorilla Glass on the iPhone or various other smartphones, and biggest optical fiber manufacturer in the world. Everything glass, everything optics. So it's not surprising that our relationship with Corning is of enormous value, and I would think they would say the same thing about us in terms of, you know, seeing metamaterials as being an enormous disrupting factor in optics in general. And we are on the cusp of capturing some of these, as I think you are too at TDK Ventures.
So you give me a really good segue to talk about corporations with corporate venturing. Can you speak to your LPs who are corporates, their motivations to invest in your fund? Because clearly they want something from you they couldn't get by just doing a CVC themselves.
Yes, I think we talk to a lot of corporations in our fundraising process, and a lot of them said no. For 2, one, they have their own corporate VC, or 2, they've already invested in other venture funds, and you know they're full. But we did bring in two corporates into our fund. But to answer your question, I don't know if I have an explicit answer for you, but for sure, if I could speak for our 2 LPs, metamaterials is an area of extreme interest. We are spending all of our time in that space, so we believe we're subject matter experts. We believe we've got a fairly good pulse on what's going on around us, not just near, but around the world as much as we can. So I think we're a good resource for viewpoints and, you know, not specifics on particular companies or anything. It doesn't get to that level of detail ever, frankly. It's more, we are a good sounding board for just generally what's going on in the world. But, you know, ultimately we have a fiduciary responsibility to make a return on investment for corporate. They're no different from a financial investor, a pension fund, or an endowment. We have the same fiduciary responsibility to them to make a profit for them. But there is an added bonus. I know that having someone focused on this is of extreme interest for them.
And you're the subject matter that can bring a point of view, insights. What's your best practice around it? Do you have regular calls or irregular calls?
Well, we'll have an annual meeting, which is for everybody, for all our investors. We will do a quarterly memo, which I think is pretty routine for a VC fund to their LPs. But that's pretty much it. Maybe an ad hoc call here and there, but very, very rarely. So, you know, but it's fairly high level and not much more than perhaps is reported publicly in the news. And maybe, so, you know, we have to respect confidentiality in every direction. There's a huge responsibility there. But I should also say, you know, some of our startups have benefited from not only in-kind help from these corporates, but also direct investment too, outside of our fund. So there's all sorts of different things. There's advice, but it's I'm very pleased with the corporate VCs we have in our fund, because they have been very helpful to us, very helpful to our startups, and I think they would say the same about our help to them in terms of what's going on in the world.
Very nice. Can you speak now, linked to, now it's no longer LP, but co-investors. What do you see as the biggest value when you see corporate VCs investing with you?
Well, I think just the industry-wide experience. We have some co-investments with the likes of Sony, for example, Sony Innovation Fund, which is the name of the venture capital group, Applied Ventures, which is the corporate group of Applied Materials. I see you nodding. I know you know them very well yourself, Nicolas.
Yep.
Just to name but two, but just hugely valuable in terms of market insight. Corporate VCs not always take. It's rare. I see them taking board seats, but board observer rights. So we welcome them to the board because they bring a viewpoint and they see things and they send warning signs about something that's going on another side of the world that we would never know about. So I think it's just very helpful. I've never seen any downside. It's funny. I still come across sometimes, less now than perhaps a number of years ago, where the viewpoint of, and I might have had this viewpoint myself, so I got to be careful what I say, years ago, where a corporate VC, no, I don't think we should have them as an investor yet. Let's wait until a strategic round around Series C or D, maybe then, because they're going to learn too much about our startup, and they might, there's an anti-competitive situation. Well, that couldn't be further than the truth. In all my years of experience, it's been quite the opposite. And so I usually shoot that argument down pretty quickly, unless it has grounds for solid grounds, because I've never seen that actually happen. It's been more helpful than hurtful, for sure.
Especially in the last 2 years, it's been very challenging raising funds for entrepreneurs. What's your observation of corporate VCs in the past 2 years? Have they redeemed themselves from the perceptions from the past?
I think that's too strong a redeem. I don't redeem from what. I think I've always had a pretty positive view of corporate VC. So I'm speaking on my behalf, and I think my partner would say the same thing. You and I spoke a little bit earlier today before this interview, and I made the statement that thank God that corporate VCs are around, because venture capital is going through a little bit of a rough and tumble period here. And I say it more for the Series A and B and beyond stages. Seed is still very strong. We see a lot of seed investments, and there's a reasonable amount of capital still going into deep tech in early stage seed plus early seed, whatever you want to call it. And however, when it comes to Series A and B, where a little bit more heavy duty capital, particularly with Series B, in deep tech, it's tough. It's a tough environment right now to get money from financial VCs, even for the best of startups. And it's just the nature of the business. Exactly. Now, what we have seen, thankfully, is that the CVCs, the corporate VCs, they've kept strong. In some cases, they're stepping up and filling that void. Not always. But we're thankful that there's a pretty robust corporate venture capital community out there right now that's still very engaged. Whereas one might have incorrectly assumed that there's a pullback, quarterly earnings, let's just shave stuff away from the corporate VC side of our company. We haven't seen that yet, thankfully. So CVCs play a tremendously important role, if you ask me. It's particularly pronounced when you get to beyond seed stage right now as we speak. Yeah.
You mentioned two very good corporate VCs, Sony Innovation Fund and Applied Ventures, very good ones. Subject matters, they do really good due diligence, they support their portfolio companies. Let's assume you're meeting a new CVC, first time you meet with them. What would be the questions to assess whether you're going to give them the benefit of the doubt, trust them, want to invest with them?
Yeah, and I think whatever question I would pose like that, they probably would do the same about me. But I think it gets back to some of the things, the ground rules at least I use for myself. I said earlier with entrepreneurs is just, do we share the same sort of, are we like-minded in sort of the things that we're going after? Are you easy to get along with? Do you have decision power? I know you're working for a large corporation, but do you truly have, some autonomy to get things done? Those are the types of things that I think are important. And I think the same vice versa. Are we Are we easy to work with? Do we put punitive types of terms? Those types of things. But I find maybe I'm speaking personally here from my own personal career, which has been for the most part in industry, in operational experiences. I would have a soft spot for the corporate VC side anyway. It would come by default.
That's nice to hear. Now, there's one thing you said earlier which I wanted to come back to, which was board meetings is every day. It's not actually during the board meeting when you review the board deck. Can you maybe share a bit more about what you mean by that, but also the best practices that come from it? Because I think here, especially for early stage, you're here to be supportive of the entrepreneur day after day.
Yeah.
Share more, please.
Yeah, I think I make myself very available. So there's no formalities. I'm speaking of if you're an entrepreneur or a CEO, text me, call me. Don't wait to set up an appointment. I don't have a secretary or an admin. Just call me directly, whatever's on your mind. Meet regularly for coffee. I think being a CEO, being a founder, it's the loneliest job in the world, and I recognize that. I've done it. And unless you've been in that position, I think it's hard to empathize with what that really means. It's a very lonely place. Your employee, all the sticky, horrible, unsolvable issues, from paying bills to the photocopier not working to the technology not working, they all land on your desk.
It stops with you.
It stops with you, and you've got nobody to go whinge and whine to. Your employees don't want to hear it. They want you to actually find the solution. Your investors don't really want to know. Your board really doesn't know because you run the company. You're in charge. Your partner, your spouse at home, they don't really want to know. They can't fix it. So you're on your own. So you have to, I think as a mentor, board member, investor, I think at the early stage, I believe we have a responsibility to coach, mentor, listen, call it therapy for want of a better term, but be available, not 24/7, but a lot of hours and a lot of days, and be there and give help and support and encourage that. Don't stick your neck in the sand. Don't be afraid when things are not going wrong. Tell us. Don't leave it for 3 board meetings later to tell us that things have gone completely off the rails. So I think that's really, it's a relationship thing. It's a very, these are very flat organizations when you think about early stage companies, and you're all in it. You're all incentivized to make it successful. It's not about annual appraisals and reviews. It's like, how do we get this stuff moving, and what do you need? What do you want me to do? Who can I call for you?
Now, Conrad, I think this empathy and this support and guidance, it probably comes with so much more weight coming from you, having been in their shoes. But that's not true for all VCs. So how would you advise like a new VC or new CVC who come from a big corporate, have never been in their shoes, but yet I think there is value to have that support role?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you could teach empathy, or I think you just have to just instill that sort of importance, that listen and I'm sure you come with lots of experience in your domain to be a VC, but just roll up the sleeves and get in there and help them a little bit, and it's not just about writing a check. I mean, it is important to write a check, don't get me wrong, but I think playing a part in particularly the early stages of success of the company is very, very important. Now, when you get to a much later stage, when it's more operational focus and it's execution, a little bit more discipline and formality start to kick in, and CEOs get replaced or not replaced around then. And but there's I think it's just, I'd like to think at this stage in my career, at least, there's a mentorship side of it, there's a teaching aspect of it, there's a give back, call it whatever cliche you want, but I get off on helping young entrepreneurs and helping see them successful. I find I draw tremendous energy hanging out with crazy entrepreneurs doing crazy things, working late hours. I think that's it's a very fulfilling, and it can drive your day. It gives you energy.
Actually, I think it's one of the signs to know it's VC is right for you. You get
Yeah,
energy from meeting these amazing entrepreneurs. Maybe a
exactly.
question.
Yeah, I agree, Nicolas.
Maybe a question for the audience. Some of the audience are thinking about starting a corporate VC. What would you say are the right reasons to start a CVC?
What are the right reasons to start a corporate VC?
Yeah.
Well, if you're in a corporation that doesn't have a CVC, I think the right reasons is that, there's tremendous access to and focus to know what's going on outside your own company. That I think is probably one of the biggest drivers. Just there's an education piece, or there's just a knowledge piece of it that's of infinite value. And if you can make money along the way, all the better. But there's an opportunity. Obviously, there's acquisition opportunities for a corporation by having a VC arm. You get first dibs, first look. You know the company intimately, so you know where all the good, the bad, and the ugly is, and you're in probably the best position to assess if this is perfect for being part of our company. But maybe I can answer another way. What are the wrong reasons to be a
That was my next question.
Yeah, yeah. It's like it's a cool job, and it's got a cool title, and you get to go around the world and eat cool meals, and everybody's really nice to you. That would be a terribly wrong way to approach going into venture capital, if you ask me.
Yeah, it's actually quite impressive how many people think that this is a cool job, and when they realize how much hard work it takes and
Yeah.
discipline and long hours, it's very
Yes.
far from the romantic view.
It is, and I think particularly from a young career perspective, I think it can be maybe a little bit more challenging because the scorecard on how well you are doing or not doing is quite long. So it can take 10 years before you realize you've done a great job, a mediocre job, or an absolutely terrible job.
Mm.
And meanwhile, 10 years of your life has gone by, and that's the first time you get an assessment on how it's gone. So it's the opposite to the statement I made earlier about the annual performance review. It's you get a one review in 10 years, which is a bit it could be very late depending on the results. But but I think it's a wonderful career. It's not for everybody. If I was to advise people in the career choice of this business, I might be biased to saying it might be an easier job as you progress further through your career than if you perhaps came out of school with an MBA or something like that. That's just my personal opinion, but because I think coming armed with some industry experience or some knocks and some ups and downs of working in business, I think that can be hugely valuable later in a VC career than perhaps you might not have it in the early stage of your career.
Thank you. I want to finish this interview with one question, which is really about what it is you're most excited about investing next in the next 12 to 18 months.
Yeah, that's a good question. There are so many things, but I have been surprisingly increasingly interested in some of the advancements being made in medicine, an area which I have absolutely no experience whatsoever in. But in my dangerous vein of physics in me, I see enormous potential for metamaterials in things like discovering new drugs and antibiotics to biomedical devices that, for example, we have an investment here in the Bay Area called Lead Optic, which is doing absolutely remarkable things where they can use the brilliance of using metamaterials to make these tiny optics that can go on to a bronchoscope that goes deep down into the lungs, where no ultrasound can go to today to detect lung tumors or cancers, and do this real-time imaging. So there's these clever entrepreneurs that, like in Lead Up, that have come up with these remarkably novel ways to use what looks like now quite a simple idea of optics, of getting deep into lungs and seeing things that could never be seen before. So I'm actually quite excited among many things, but medicine is one. But also I see huge things in computing. I think the AI boom has spurred a whole lot of activity in optical computing, in communications, in all sorts of sensors that can do things in automobiles and robots and so forth. So there's so many things, Nicolas. Like probably would need 1 more hour to go down the list.
No, but this is an exciting area of technology development that have so many meaningful applications. I'm glad you have MetaVC looking into it and helping these entrepreneurs develop this application. Thank you very much, Conrad. You were very open and candid, and I think full of good wisdom for entrepreneurs and CVCs alike. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicolas. I really appreciate you inviting us along.